Hello and welcome everybody back to Digging the Details for our audio commentary today. My name is Dean Brinkerhoff and I'm here with Jim Fanning. Hello, Jim. How are you?
I'm doing great, Dean, and I'm excited to be talking to you about not only one of our favorite movies, but one of the greatest movies that's ever been made, The Wizard of
Right.
Oz from 1939.
It's certainly one of my favorites and beloved by tons and tons of people worldwide and has been for decades and decades. And in fact, this is an anniversary year for The Wizard of Oz. It was released in 1939, so this year in 2024 marks its 85th anniversary. So we thought this would be a great title to review and share some fun facts and anecdotes and analysis. And without much further ado, let's get the movie started. Me and Jim both have the film queued up, and we're looking at the Lion MGM logo. Iconic.
Ready
and
ready when you are. And everybody that's listening, if you'd like to watch the movie with us, you can start too.
We'll go on the count of three. 1, 2, 3.
Very much an MGM movie in its opulence and its glossiness and its quality, because those things are what MGM was known for. It's interesting to know that this movie, the production of it and the fact that they were doing it, was inspired by a certain Disney movie. Can you guess what it was?
Oh, I know what it was. But I think it's really cool also that it was influenced so much by Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Released in 1937, so people can see the timeline here. And let's not forget that The Wizard of Oz, or I should say Snow White, was the most popular movie ever made. So people stood up and took notice that a fantasy film could make a lot of money. Samuel
Definitely.
Goldwyn owned the rights, so MGM bought the rights from him. And it was intended from the start, as far as MGM was concerned, to be a Judy Garland vehicle.
Of course, we have our sepia tone beginning, which was such a neat technical aspect to add to the film. I do love this dedication at the beginning that's so beautiful, just as a personal note.
It really is quite beautiful. And
To the young in heart.
has only grown more true over the years. 40 years they're talking about. They mean the publication of The Wizard of Oz in 1900. And now, what did we say? What anniversary is this? The 85th since
Yes.
the movie was released. So, time has no power over the wonderfulness of this movie.
Right.
We see many, many matte paintings throughout the film, and the first one was there of the Kansas landscape as Dorothy's running home.
Beautiful sets. You really believe that this is, Kansas, that the backgrounds are real life. And I mean, the special effects to come are truly, truly groundbreaking.
Of course, the filming the first part in black and white was very deliberate. For one thing, L. Frank Baum described Kansas, I think, 9 times in the few pages that open the book as gray. And they knew they were going to use Technicolor. There was no question about that, as new as it was. Certainly Snow White was in brilliant Technicolor, so this had to be. But also, I think movies at that time were seen as, if you take them as reality, well, reality was in black and white. So this part is the reality, and then the Technicolor is the fantasy.
It's a neat contrast to add to the film that really makes a difference.
And here we see the 3 farmhands that Dorothy will reimagine in her dream as her three friends in Oz. None of them were true movie stars, but they were very well known on stage, very well regarded as brilliant stage performers. So we'll get into them as we go. But it's interesting that Ray Bolger as Hunk very clearly talks about not having a brain. Bert Lahr as Zeke talks about having courage. But Jack Haley doesn't really mention about not having a heart. And we'll see that in a minute. But that's because a scene was cut out where he was trying to invent a machine that would repel cyclones. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. So, and in the cut part, he made a reference to this machine is so great, it's almost like it has a heart, or words to that effect. But I think what gave them the freedom to cut that out is coming right up here when Aunt M says, "I saw you tinkering with that contraption." She's talking about the machine, and he strikes this pose. Someday they'll erect a statue to me in the town. Well, that pose is very similar to the Tin Man's pose when he's rusted shut, as it were, when Dorothy first meets him. So that's the foreshadowing for Hickory and the Tin Man there.
How
And it works.
clever.
Yes, and I think I'm pretty sure that they cut out the thing about the machine is that it's kind of cheesy and didn't really fit with the tone of the rest of the film. It's kind of a silly thing. And there's nothing about these Kansas scenes that are silly. So it kind of works.
And it does tie right into the introduction of the Tin Man. I love that.
Yeah, I think it does. So coming up here, I just don't know what to say about this. The greatest songs ever written, and really shows
beautiful.
really shows that this film is a musical and has musical aspects. The adaptation of the Oz story, it's not just a movie adaptation, it's a musical adaptation. So that's very important. In musicals, things have to be crystallized. And there's a lot in the Baum book that is not in the movie. They couldn't have it in all of that in the movie. So the musical aspect kind of takes care of a lot of that.
Right.
But at any rate, Harold Arlen and E.Y. Harburg wrote the songs, and they brilliantly thought, well, what would this little farm girl that lives in this gray landscape, what's the one thing that she would have seen that would be colorful? A rainbow. And of course, there's nothing more colorful than a rainbow, and it's up in the sky.
Right.
So she's like, well, where could I go to get away from all my troubles? I'll have to fly over the rainbow. So what a masterstroke of the imagination. It totally works, and everything in it. Her troubles, she hopes, will melt away. Well, how will they melt away? Like a lemon drop. That's something that a child would think of. And of course, a lemon drop itself is a spot of color. So it's so beautifully conceived in every way.
And the descriptions are so beautiful.
And it really points up how the myth that we may or may not get into about Shirley Temple really being who they wanted for Dorothy. They knew that if Shirley Temple had been available, yes, they might have cast her because she was a huge box office star, the #1 star for many years. But they knew that as talented as she was, and she most definitely was very talented, she could not have carried off this song or any of the acting that they knew was going to be called for. Only one person could, and that's Judy Garland, because they were very aware of the extraordinary voice and also acting talent that she had. And she's the whole movie. She's in almost every scene, and of course the entire thing is about her. So it had to be somebody that could really not only carry that on their shoulders, but just knock that out of the park. And she does.
And that's a testament to the legacy of that song, Over the Rainbow. I know that song was chosen for many notable recognitions over the years, and I think the bonus features on the home video releases for The Wizard of Oz describe it as, it was named Song of the Century, top song in cinema history, etc. It's just so beloved and well known. And Judy Garland is really, really the one that pulled that off to bring it to the world. And
it's interesting
amazing.
because that's all very well observed, Dean. And it's interesting that she was known as the little girl with the big voice. She was known for belting out songs. And yet her champions at MGM, like Arthur Freed, who's really the one mainly responsible for this movie and will go on to produce many, many other great MGM classics, but also Roger Edens, the song arranger. They were her champions, and they knew she could do something without belting. They knew she could do something very tender and very heartfelt. And sure enough, who has ever sung the song more beautifully with a great simplicity but great heart? It's extraordinary.
It's honesty, it's integrity, it's all of those things and everything you mentioned.
And it sets up the whole film. It's very incredible that it was the producers, or some of the producers, some of the executives wanted it cut. And it was in fact dropped at one point. But the film is unimaginable without it. It's the heart, it's the center. And Arthur Freed apparently was the one that, I believe Mervyn LeRoy was also very much behind it as well. But apparently it was Arthur Freed who really had the ultimatum about it. It has to stay. And thank goodness calmer heads prevailed.
Absolutely. Toto, the little female terrier, was actually a actor in her own right. Her name was Terry, and one of her other roles was with Shirley Temple in Bright Eyes. I always like to think about. That's a fun connection with Shirley Temple along with this film.
And if you see her in any of her other films, you can see how good she is. She too has an enormous role in this film. She has several important plot points, or I should say Toto, of course, is a male. She was playing in the male part. She was way ahead of her time.
Definitely.
But she is, since Judy Garland's in almost every scene, so is Toto, because Toto's constantly with her. And throughout the film, you can see her. There she is everywhere. I keep saying she because the actor's a she, but we're to Toto. And her name indeed was Terry, but after this movie, her owner and trainer changed her name to what? Do you know
it Toto?
This? Yeah.
I actually didn't know that. That's really funny. That's it makes sense though.
Yeah. Because that's what, of course, how everybody else thought of her from then on. Or I should say, none of this opening material is in the original Baum book. Dorothy's said it just sets Dorothy up as a Kansas farm girl, and almost immediately the cyclone comes and transports her to Oz. There's none of this. There's none of these other characters except Aunt Em and Uncle Henry. And it's really very, very, very clever how this is all done. I do think that MGM was a little afraid of the fantasy element. MGM made movies for adults, and we've talked many times that, of course, Disney movies are for adults too, but they were a little afraid of the fantasy element being accepted. So that's partially why they wanted to root this in a reality. And, it's all explained because it's all a dream. The Baum book, it is not a dream. Oz really exists, and Dorothy actually goes there. But it works really well it's incredible how well it works. That they have these Kansas counterparts that become the Oz characters. And of course, it's established that Dorothy has this relationship with them. So she has an affection for these characters in Oz even before she meets them.
Totally.
So somehow that packs an incredible punch. And it really does add to the whole idea that she wants to get home because there are people there that she loves.
And that does root the audience member, right? Exactly. And these people that she does really know, twisted and, turned a little bit on their head in her dream. But in this scene, of course, we get the introduction, Dorothy to Professor Marvel, played by Frank Morgan. And I believe this is role 1 of about 5 in this film that Frank Morgan plays. Fantastically so.
They had originally hoped, and here's another treat for Disney fans, to have Ed Wynn play this role.
Right.
But he did turn it down, and they thought, well, maybe one reason he thought he turned it down is that the role wasn't big enough. So they added the other counterparts or versions of the wizard character throughout to beef up the part. And they were hoping then to get W.C. Fields to play the wizard. I think that E.Y. Harburg was really behind that. And I believe that he wrote the offering of the symbols of the gifts with Fields in mind. That is more satirical than people sometimes realize, that, you do have brains as long as you have a symbol of it, like this diploma.
Right.
That's all you need. But Fields obviously turned it down, and finally it did go to the great character actor Frank Morgan, who was so brilliant in every single thing he did. He made tons of movies for MGM and was loaned out to a couple of the other studios as well, including a movie with Shirley Temple. And he knows how to do the comedy. He knows how to do the drama. He knows how to convey the heart. And certainly he can pull off those other versions of the character throughout with great comedic flair. And it's absolutely brilliant.
Going back just a tad, I love the little tent that Professor Marvel has, or his traveling caravan. As a child, I remember watching this from the youngest I can remember till now, and just how kind of mysterious and spooky it feels in his little caravan as Dorothy meets him and starts really just, is so childlike, coming up to him and, oh, what does this mean? What's going on? Aunt Em, I just always found that an interesting set, and, he's got the skull above the door and kind of spooky. It's one I would love to walk through, and there's so many sets in this film, almost all of them, that I would really love to walk through one day in a 3D space, although that's not sure to happen, but that's just something I always think about as my own fantasy comes alive during this movie. It's like, man, I want to go walk there. I want to go visit and see what it's like to sit in Professor Marvel's chair,
It is probably the most interesting of the Kansas sets, that's for sure, because it's so unique. And of course he's out to bilk everybody. That's the subtext of that. Everything is designed to convince people that he can foretell the future and all these things. Certainly works on Dorothy. But it's very charming. He's very eccentric and very, very lovable. And there's wonderful bits in that whole scene.
And the fun of this film is, we've got some great peril happening now with the Twister, the Cyclone, but we get these little touches of the guys in the rowboat waving to her.
It's like The transformation of Miss Gulch into the witch is like it's like what it. Here's where the film turns a corner. In Dorothy's
Yeah,
dream, now things have changed. She's been seeing things out the window that are Kansian. Now they're Ozian. Also, very quickly, people sometimes speculate, is that the Wicked Witch of the East or the Wicked Witch of the West? It's apparently the Wicked Witch of the East because if you look real closely, and it's very easy to do in high definition, you can see that she's wearing the ruby slippers.
really. That's
So,
something I've never noticed before.
so it's apparently the Wicked Witch of the East, and Dorothy's house just fell on her.
That makes
now,
sense.
now here we come to one of the greatest moments in movie history. The spoiler alert, the switch from black and white to Technicolor. Absolutely brilliant. And I've read many accounts where people in 1939 were absolutely astounded by this. They
And
had
if
no
I'm
idea that this was coming.
and if I'm correct, the lighting in this room right as she opens the door is just in that black and white tone.
Yes, they painted the set in gray, and the door and the walls and everything. And Dorothy's, or I should say, Judy Garland's stand-in.
Literally steps into the color.
Yeah, well, no, she opens the door, so she's
So
wearing a black and white outfit, and she steps aside, and Judy Garland steps in.
that makes sense.
Bobby Cochet was Judy Garland's stand-in. So the Technicolor actually starts before Dorothy opens the door, but you're right. They have filmed it so cleverly and designed it so cleverly that you don't know. And you certainly don't know that that's not Judy Garland opening the door. But what a stunning thing. And everybody who's seen this movie for the first time has the same reaction, like, wow. It's just the greatest wow ever. This Munchkinland set is absolutely incredible. By the way, you can see the ruby slippers when you look closely. There's the Wicked Witch of the East with her feet sticking out. You can see
a lot easier to see in the 4K, the high definition. Yeah.
This is not only a very colorful land that she's arrived in, but the toadstools and the flowers and everything are towering, just as she herself will tower over the adults she's now going to meet. She's a little girl in Kansas surrounded by adults, and they are oppressing her in a sense. And now she has arrived in a land where she is the one that towers over, and she has rescued them from oppression. So it's a very, very interesting comparison.
Yeah, and it happens in the blink of an eye almost, where she just arrives and is like, what's going on?
And here is Glinda, the Good Witch of the North, and she does not have a counterpart in Kansas. And some people have said, oh, well, it's too bad that she doesn't, or why doesn't she? Well, it's actually, and the filmmakers did consider giving her a counterpart in Kansas, but it's much better that she doesn't, because up until the arrival of the Wicked Witch of the West, everybody Dorothy meets, they're just strictly part of this new land that she's never been part of. And Glinda kind of represents the oddness of this land. She's otherworldly, and the casting of Billy Burke was also quite brilliant, because Billy Burke kind of had a unique quality about her that fits this strange new land. Between her way of acting and her voice, and the way she just smiles and laughs all the time, it's an incredible representation. It just seems otherworldly and strange.
Yeah, it's totally fantastical and surreal almost.
And it's very cute how the Munchkins are very timid, and they're kind of tiptoeing out because they're still not quite sure who this new arrival is. and Glinda's reassuring them and telling them the story. And she does know that Dorothy's from Kansas. Well, obviously, that's a star. Dorothy has fallen from a star, and the name of the star is Kansas. By the way, from the start of Glinda's singing here, and for the next 6 minutes, there's no other straight dialogue or anything. It's all song and dance.
Right.
So here's where the film really explodes as a musical and quite brilliant. And again, this is completely contrary to anything Dorothy's ever experienced. There's nothing here to remind her of Kansas. There's nothing here. It's just pure imagination, to borrow the phrase from Willy Wonka.
Yeah. Another similar film, I mean, way later, but I always kind of think of the two as similar in a lot of ways.
Yes. Yes.
That's a good phrase to use anyway.
Especially with the Charlie character. He's very much Dorothy-like. And the actor who plays Charlie in the movie, his name escapes me, Peter Ostrom, I think. He's quite brilliant as Charlie. He has the same heart and same belief that Judy Garland brings to this.
True.
So the Munchkins are all played by little people. The MGM wanted 300 of them, and all they could manage was 125 or so. So they filled it out with children. Some of the people you see in the background are actual children, not grown-ups who are little people. But most of them are.
Right. And with the exception of a couple of them, most of the voices were dubbed in. And there's a Disney connection here with those dubbed in voices. There were three. One of them was Pinto Colvig, known in Disney history as the voice of Goofy. And then there was also Billy Bletcher, who provided so many different voices. And then Pinto Colvig actually did more than Goofy also. But Billy Bletcher did Pete and tons of other voices. Just have to look up his credentials. He's all over the map. And then the last voice was J.D. Jukes. As a child, I loved them because they're just so interesting and unique characters. They're not human. They're these little fun munchkins that Dorothy meets, and I don't know, it's just kind of fun to think about as a kid. Like what on earth's happening here, you know?
I do think children especially are drawn to them.
Yeah.
As Glinda,
they're kind of like me, you know? They're short. And
yes, yes. And as Glinda explains so succinctly, they're the little people who live in this land. The color and the spectacle here, it's just unbelievable.
Right.
And another surprise, this describes the whole movie, but there's another surprise around every corner. Who expected those eggs to have munchkins in them, and they pop out?
Yep. We'll see plenty of examples of the wonderful Technicolor throughout the rest of the film, with the beautiful yellow brick road, Emerald City coming up, etc. But I just wanted to touch on the fact that, Jim, you and I got to see the original three-strip, Technicolor camera that was used to film this wonderful movie. And it's located in the Hollywood Heritage Museum for those who may be interested to see it for themselves. That's a plug for the wonderful museum that we got to enjoy, but also just fun info for fans of this film to be able to go and witness such a neat piece of technical history. It was also used to film Gone with the Wind.
Yes, Technicolor was still extremely rare because it was extremely difficult. The first feature film in Technicolor was in 1935. That's only just a few years before this, Becky Sharp. But Technicolor was extremely challenging. And then for a movie like this, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
the lights had to be so strong and bright, and they're especially Dorothy's friends. They're wearing these very cumbersome costumes. It's very extremely hot for them under those circumstances. One thing I wanted to point out is that one of the members of the Lollipop Guild, the one with the round face, he was also in Freaks for MGM in 1932. He's really the main character in that, Hans. And his name is Harry Earls, also known as, also a member of the Doll family, as they called themselves. They were little people, and they had come from Germany. And if I remember correctly, he had to learn his lines phonetically for Freaks because he didn't speak English. Anyhow, there's lots of people that have never seen Freaks and will never see Freaks because it's a challenging film for a lot of people. It's a horror film. But here he is in The Wizard of Oz, so we're so glad that he is.
Fascinating. I'll have to watch that.
And speaking of a horror movie, the Wicked Witch of the East arrives and kind of upturns the whole movie.
Or the West, you should say.
Did I misspeak? I meant to say
that's West. Okay, but yeah, just to clarify.
Glad you corrected me. And that's our first glimpse of the Ruby Slippers. Well, the first shot. We had a glimpse earlier. And speaking of the color and everything, this color schemes, it was Baum who said the Yellow Brick Road and the Emerald City. And he actually had a color for each land. Munchkinland was blue, whereas Emerald City, of course, was green. But in his book, the magical shoes are actually the silver shoes.
Right.
And it was the brilliant screenwriter Noel Langley who came up with the idea of a red set of shoes, because this is Technicolor and it's going to look great, whereas silver shoes would be a little bit blah.
Right.
So he came up with the idea of the ruby slippers.
A fun fact I think I heard from the wonderful audio commentary done by John Fricke. Those of you listening should also go listen to that. It's spectacular, and it's on most of the home video releases of The Wizard of Oz. But the certificate of death that's presented to Dorothy, I believe, is dated 19 years to the day after author L. Frank Baum died.
Yeah, I believe it was May 7th, right? Seems like an incredible coincidence.
Definitely.
I think with the Blu-ray and the high definition and everything, you can read it on the screen. It didn't used to be so easily visible, but in the stills, the still photos that were taken, you can see it.
Definitely.
There's one very posed shot with the coroner holding it up.
In addition to the wonderful Technicolor camera that we saw in the Hollywood Heritage Museum, I believe it's in this scene, Jim, where she's here in the Munchkinland. Dorothy wears the ruby slippers. We actually got to also see the ruby slippers, one of the pairs, this year at the Hollywood Museum in the old Max Factor building. And that was really, really neat to see them in person. Thought it was neat to mention that here, because I believe this is where those pair were used, if I'm not mistaken. But
both museums we're talking about are both in Highland, which is pretty incredible, not too far from each other.
Yeah.
The Hollywood Museum that's in the Max Factor building, that's on Highland, right near Hollywood Boulevard. So it's quite easy to find, and they have an astounding collection, including a pair of the ruby slippers. Were there more than one pair? Yes, because in making movies, especially for your lead character who's in so much of the movie, it's very common for multiples to be made because things break and they're worn out. So I think the count of existing ruby slipper pairs that are authentic, I believe it's 7. Now, there are people that create ruby slippers, artisans who can make exact replicas, and you can probably get one of those if you wanted to for a few $100s. But one authentic pair just broke all records, no question about it, when they sold at auction for, I think, $32 million.
And that was only recently too. That was within like the last month.
Yeah, it was very, very recent. An astounding amount of money. Those slippers were actually used in the production of the movie. That particular pair. There's a pair in the Smithsonian. And
Something that was so neat. Oh, go ahead.
I was
Continue.
just going to say some of them are in the hands of private collectors. I don't think we even know who all owns them.
Yeah. Hard to tell because who would give that up, right? I was just gonna say something that was a truly testament to the magic of movie making. When we did see the ruby slippers, Jim, you asked me what my first observation was about them, and I said, you know what, I know they're old, they're several decades old by now, but the first thing I noticed offhand is how unshiny they were. And throughout the film, they're glittering, they're sparkling, they're just absolutely magical, right? But it's the testament of the amount of lighting, the technical effects involved with focusing the attention on the ruby slippers and really making them glow and look enchanted.
And it was a fact about movie making that Alfred Hitchcock would make, that nothing matters except how things look on the screen.
Correct.
So they were not meant to be seen anywhere else but on the screen. So when we look at them in real life, you can see that they're just sequins sewn onto a red shoe, and they're made of silk and velvet with little pieces of costume jewelry. But on screen, and there's many such shots, especially if you watch Judy Garland's feet, they sparkle and glow just as you say, Dean.
It's truly amazing. Here's our second introduction to Ray Bolger as, he was one of the farmhands, but now here he is as the Scarecrow.
And he has such a wonderful performance. He's so heartfelt, and Dorothy is so compassionate toward him. They have an instant bond and chemistry. And that's one reason, according to Ray Bolger, that he wanted to play the Scarecrow and not the Tin Man as he was originally offered. He said he really thought he could bring out the great sympathy of the Scarecrow. Scarecrow's lacking brains, but not heart. So he brings out all the heart. And he's just incredible from the get-go.
And he fought and petitioned for that role, didn't he?
Yes. He was very, very taken with the part because he was aware of the famous Broadway show that was years and years before this movie was made. And when people remembered that, especially the actors who played the Scarecrow and the Tin Man, that was just as we think of those characters as these actors. Before this movie, people thought of that Broadway show. I think Fred Stone, it was his name, that played the Scarecrow. So Ray Bolger had no problem wanting to be all dressed up like this. And it did fit with his style, with his eccentric dancing. It very much fit the way he could kind of throw himself around like a man made of straw that doesn't weigh very much.
Definitely. And in the scene in the cornfield, I believe there was an elaborate dance number that was ultimately cut from the film that you can watch on the bonus features, and you can really see him in his true form. I mean, you see him through the film in his true form, but really, really stop and take notice of his skill as the Scarecrow in that deleted scene. Makes you wish for a extended cut.
Well, I'm of the school that it was best left out because it was shot much later and it was directed by Busby Berkeley, so it was aside from the tone of the film, and it really doesn't work. I mean, it doesn't work like the rest of the film.
I see.
So I don't. John Fricke says probably mostly because of length, it was cut, trying to cut the film down, but also because it truly doesn't fit. It doesn't fit the tone of the rest of it.
That's fair. Like, why stop here and take your time when you can move on to the other characters? We're setting up exposition here.
And it has a lot of trick things like you were mentioning. He's flying up into the air and balancing on a giant pumpkin as it rolls down the yellow brick road.
Lands on the fence and it crashes, yeah. Here we're back to the horror film.
Yes, the talking trees in the book it's a much more extended sequence in the original book, and they are quite scary. But the film plays a good tightrope most of the time between humor and kind of a frightening aspect.
Yes.
But Dorothy, as Dorothy says, I keep forgetting I'm not in Kansas. She's already met the Scarecrow who can talk, and now she's met apple trees, where she thought she could just take an apple, but it grabs it from her and slaps her hand.
How would you like if I picked something off of you? Slow pan over to the foot of who?
So who was supposed to play the Tin Man originally? I know you know this, Dean.
It was me, wasn't it? Just kidding. Well, he's kind of a country bumpkin. You may know him from the Beverly Hillbillies. Buddy Ebsen.
And also, let's not forget Walt Disney's Davy Crockett.
Yeah, let's not forget his pal Georgie Russell.
Which renewed his career, because this is what sunk his career, was him being cast as the Tin Man and then not being able to portray him.
Yeah, his makeup was unfortunately something that was dangerous, put him in the hospital, and MGM recast him.
They used aluminum dust, and as it turned out, it was coating his lungs because he was breathing it in. Nobody realized that until it was too late. So he was in the hospital for I don't know how long. And because he was out so long, they had to replace him.
I believe he tried to take a breath and he said nothing happened. So they called an ambulance. Horrifying. So instead, after, all of that mishap happened, they recast the Tin Man with Jack Haley, who I don't think was super aware of all of that, but they replaced his makeup with aluminum paste that was administered to him instead of the dust.
No danger of him breathing that in.
Right.
Jack Haley was a very famous character actor, more of a movie star than either Ray Bolger or Burt Lahr. But I actually think he's a much better fit for the movie and with them than Buddy Ebsen would have been. I like Buddy Ebsen, of course, but
yes,
Jack Haley also came from the world of vaudeville and the stage, so he's more of a match for them. He matches up with them better, I think. And he has this wonderful quality about him. He decided that the Tin Man should have a different voice than his usual voice. And he said, well, I'll use the voice that I use when I'm telling my little son a fairy tale. Once upon a time in the enchanted forest. So he used that kind of gentle, otherworldly type voice, if you will, for the Tin Man.
Yes, director Victor Fleming had asked him how he was going to approach that, and that's what he told him, and Victor said, "That's exactly it. That's it. Let's go with it." And I agree. I love the Tin Man.
And who do we hear singing this special part of the song right now, Dean?
You'll hear a female voice here in a minute. "Wherefore art thou, Romeo?" It may sound familiar, and I for the longest time thought it did, but couldn't really place it. Turns out, here's another Disney connection. Here in Digging the Details, we love our Disney connections. It's the voice of Adriana Casalati, if I said that right. It's a mouthful.
And who was she?
She was Snow White, the voice of Snow White. Did I not say that? My bad.
The symmetry of the three friends that Dorothy has is quite amazing. Ray Bolger's in the movie longer because he's the first that Dorothy meets, so his song is the shortest. Jack Haley gets his own dance. Bert Lahr, who's in the movie the shortest amount of time, gets a whole entire song and special number. So they all balance each other beautifully, especially as the story unfolds.
Great observation. I've never noticed that.
And we, as John Fricke has noted, some of the simplest special effects in here are the ones that tickle people the most. The Tin Man shooting smoke out of his funnel hat was very simple, just talcum powder. And then him leaning back and forth as his legs apparently get stuck because they're still rusty. Oh, that's just an old vaudeville trick where they slip their feet into two holders and then they can lean way to the side.
That's amazing. I always wondered how that was done.
It's amazing how much they kept the witch a constant threat throughout the entire movie. Here she is threatening Dorothy's friends, who are obviously out to help her. Right there was one of the few moments where Judy Garland almost starts laughing. It's very unusual to see her do that in this scene, which is so scary. But you can see her almost start to break. And then, of course, that's terrifying that she tries to light the Scarecrow on fire.
Right.
But these two, they play this so beautifully. Now, there was a cut scene here. Do you know about this, Dean?
I believe so, but continue, please.
Well, I was just going to say they were going to use animation to have bees come out at the top of the Tin Man's hat because the Wicked Witch threatens to turn him into a beehive.
I don't think I ever knew about that one.
But because of that, we just left that scene. If you watch carefully, viewers, you can see that the film is flopped. And they had to do that because with the cut scene, the Scarecrow and the Tin Man switched places. So in order to keep them in the consistent place, they had to flop the film. And you can, once you know about it, you can see it. And were you going to go ahead? I think I know what you're going to say.
This is a scene that a lot of people like to pause. There is a long, long legend of a hanging Munchkin that we will briefly mention. There's no hanging Munchkin. There were large exotic birds brought onto the set, and that's all they are, is they're just birds in the background, and one kind of moves his head down. That's all it is.
It's a crane.
It's a crane.
And there's even stills that were taken of it with Victor Fleming kind of placing it. So some people insist upon believing it, but it's not true. It's not a hanging munchkin or anything. It's just a bird.
Pure lie. And Jim does a really good video about that on his channel.
Oh, thank you. So now we move into we see the start of the forest and the Tin Man scene, and here now we're very, very deep into it. And I think it's very interesting that the Tin Man is a citizen of Oz. The Scarecrow is a man made of straw, and he was made quite recently. The lion is a wild animal who lives in the forest. The Tin Man actually lives in the civilization, if you will, of Oz. So he has more of an awareness of the environment. So he's telling them about the forest. And also, one of the things that I regret that I agree with most of the cuts that were made, deleted scenes that were taken out. But one thing I wish had been kept is that when Dorothy starts to tell the Tin Man that they're off to see the wizard, he's a little skeptical. You can see him as she's explaining it, that he's shaking his head and looks very skeptical. And he actually had a line when she says the Emerald City. He says, the Emerald City, that's a long journey from here. He was already, see, he knows Oz. So I wish they had kept that. That really shows that two things, that he knows Oz, as I say, but also that this is a very, very, very long journey.
Right.
And watching the film, you can almost get the impression that it takes like a day. And I think that's to the detriment of it. Dorothy makes it clear at the end of the movie that she was gone for days and days. But it's almost like you could see that she starts out in the morning, and by the time they get to the witch's castle, it's night. But in reality, it's supposed to be a very long journey. Glinda says it as well. So anyhow, I always thought that was a beautiful little touch that was too bad they had cut out. So what can anybody say about Bert Lahr at this point and his performance as the lion? It is one for the ages. He completely makes it his own. And for people that knew Bert Lahr at the time, it's Bert Lahr. It's Bert Lahr as the lion. It's all his own little mannerisms and his way of speaking and his brilliant, brilliant talent, which of course is completely forgotten now, except for this movie. And of all the casting considerations, the only one where there was never any doubt whatsoever who was going to play a character was Bert Lahr as the Cowardly Lion. And this was especially true for E.Y. Harburg because he had written songs for him before this. So he knew very well what Bert would bring to this this contradiction of a character, a lion who's a coward. So one of the brilliant archetypes of literature, and he just turns it into this completely insane, but in a good way, version that I'm sure L. Frank Baum never noticed, never noticed, but never thought of. But still,
certainly a raucous, rowdy comedian and natural fit for this animalistic role.
But definitely some of the things are Baum's, as his crying and his using the tip of his tail to wipe his eyes, which he does throughout the film.
Yeah,
that came from Baum. So really wonderful. And I think here we can especially see, Buddy Epson too. Another thing about him, he was quite tall. Look how well matched they all are. Dorothy's supposed to be a little girl, and she's almost as tall as they are. They work together beautifully. Of course, in the book, Dorothy was a very little girl, maybe 6 or 7.
Right.
Judy Garland was, I think, 15, and she's trying to play it like it's 12, and she definitely succeeds. Her performance, her characterization is that of a little girl.
Her maturity is so much so that I feel I always age her up. I always consider her like almost 19, but that just shows her talent, really.
Oh, you mean you think that Dorothy, or used to think that Dorothy, the character, is supposed to be 19, or Judy Garland?
Well, Judy Garland, I
Oh,
suppose, is the
I
easiest way
see.
to put it, but that was my impression
I
at
see
whole
what you mean.
growing up. Yeah,
Yeah, she was one of those performers. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier, the little girl with the big voice.
yes,
When she was first discovered, quote unquote, people couldn't believe that she was young as she was because she had this incredibly mature voice
definitely.
and the mature acting ability that, and again, a child like Shirley Temple could not bring the depth of emotion throughout the film, but
Right.
also especially over the rainbow. And again, I am a fan of Shirley Temple. She's extraordinarily talented, but not
Me
in
too.
this way. So they would have had to pitch the whole movie in a different way if it was somebody like her. Whereas with this, it can be and is what it should have been, all about Dorothy, as the book is.
Judy brings so much more dimension to the character than someone of Shirley Temple's caliber could have done.
Another of the fantastic matte paintings seen throughout,
Oh my gosh, yes.
which are multiple. They are throughout the film, giving this fantasy landscape true width and depth.
A wonder to behold.
And this, of course, is an entire set, just with thousands of those poppies planted. Some of that in the background is a backdrop. It's a painting, but every set in this film is just incredible.
Be fun to visit this one, but we might fall asleep.
And I don't know how many people wonder why Dorothy, Toto, and the lion fall asleep, but the Scarecrow and the Tin Man do not. Well, because they're not made of flesh, they don't really breathe.
Yep, straw and metal.
It's only the flesh characters that breathe. Baum carefully explains that in the book. Bert Lahr, the way he falls with
Yep.
his feet stuck straight up in the air, he maintains that position for the rest of the time. It's very funny. Just one of the funny things that he would do.
And of course, here, another myth people like to spread and speculate about is was this asbestos that was dumped on the actors here for the snowfall? It actually was not.
It
This
was
is, oh, go ahead.
snows. I was just going to say snows in a lot of films. They knew how to make snow. It was
Yeah,
gypsum. It sort of almost like a plastic material. And at some point, we have to mention the primary writer of the film. There were 14 writers on this movie, all told. And the primary one was Noel Langley. He came up with most of the central ideas, much of the dialogue, and kind of pulled everything that had been done before him together. Absolutely brilliant. He went on to write in the 1950s one of the most famous and what many regard, including myself, the best film adaptation of a Christmas Carol ever made, the British version in black and white starring Alistair Sim. Noel Langley is the screenwriter of that. And he brought the same imagination to that. So one thing that he had seen was he remembered seeing as a child was the silent version of The Little Princess, I think it is, with Mary Pickford. And in that story, she has a dream where the characters she knows in the reality of her life are all characters in this dream. They're fantasy characters. So he remembered that and brought it to this film. And he also remembered how they were rescued from the poppy fields. In the book, it's a army of field mice. Well, you couldn't do that in a live action film.
That would be a little
So
tricky.
he remembered that the famous Broadway show, that's a snowstorm, is what uh, dampened the poppies. So he brought that in and had Glinda be the one to send the snowstorm, showing that in a way she's watching over Dorothy, which is a comforting thought.
Right, absolutely. Omniscient character.
Yes. She doesn't show up again until the end, but that's quite significant.
Right. Role number 2 for Frank Morgan as the doorman.
The Guardian of the Gates. There's a beautiful shot of the ruby slippers. One pair was reserved for close-ups, and that was one of the close-ups. I think the Hollywood Heritage has the close-up pair. Is that right? I could be wrong about that. But obviously,
one of them for sure. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So this was the Emerald City set was the largest in the film, which is saying something. And those pieces you see throughout, like right there, well, we just lost it, but they were over to the side. They were made of blown glass. So incredible set. Who's this now, Dean?
Oh, yes. Role 3 by Frank Morgan. It happens so quick that you almost forget, but I love the whole thing here with the horse of a different color as well. Which perfect. I believe was from the book too, wasn't it?
No, it's not in the book. But perfect for Technicolor.
Definitely.
And another delightful surprise that comes around every corner.
Yeah, every new scene.
I love the reaction of Dorothy every time. He's the horse of a different color you've heard tell about, and not just one color, but multiples. Now, it's very interesting that because the Tin Man was supposed to have been standing there resting for who knows how long out in the forest, out in the elements, he's all rusty. But here, he's going to get polished up, and the rest of the film, he's shiny.
Yeah.
So that's a wonderful touch. And then, of course, both Dorothy and the Cowardly Lion get different hairstyles. They get permanents.
The Scarecrow's getting fluffed and restuffed.
Exactly. And Dorothy no longer has her pigtails with bows. Now the bow's on top of her head, and she has that beautiful head of hair. And the lion gets a ribbon, too. See how shiny the Tin Man is now.
Yes.
A great touch. One interesting thing about the Wicked Witch of the West is that she was so terrifying and overpowering that some of her, here and there, her role is trimmed down to make her less impactful. I don't think they realized quite how terrifying she was going to be. She's only in the movie for 12 minutes, which people are always astounded to learn.
It really shows her power, yeah, on the screen.
And it's very, very famously, this is one of the things that's parodied and quoted quite a bit, is that she spells out, again, a wonderful surprise, except it's scary, is she's skywriting. Well, who saw that coming?
Right.
And she spells out Surrender Dorothy, but originally it had more of a message to it that was cut down, again, to make the Wicked Witch less terrifying. she wrote out originally "Surrender, Dorothy, or Die."
Oh,
So they took out the "or die" part to make it a little less frightening.
spooky. Yeah.
And then she also added her signature, which was WWW for Wicked Witch of the West.
I don't know if I've ever seen that.
And funnily enough, Margaret Hamilton, who of course is the actress who plays the Wicked Witch to brilliant effect, she took to signing her autograph. She would sign she would sign photos. Margaret Hamilton, WWW.
Oh, perfect.
Now here's the big show-stopping number that The Cowardly Lion was given strictly as a performance piece for Bert Lahr. Everything that Bert Lahr was known for is put into this song. And Harlan and Harburg, Arlen, sorry, I'm mispronouncing Harold Arlen's name. I'm like joining Harold and Arlen to make it one word.
That's okay.
Harold Arlen and E.Y. Harburg obviously wrote this song specifically for Bert Lahr, and they knew exactly what to do. Because this was everything you see in the song were parts of what he was known for. He was celebrated for this kind of thing, and it fits the
vocalizations and.
Except in the scenes where the lion is holding his own tail, they had a man up in the catwalk with a fish line.
I was gonna ask if you knew. Yeah, that's so funny how it will take a life of its own from time to time.
Yeah, it's just like whipping back and forth, and
it's done cleverly, as if it was a real tail.
But depending on which version of the movie you see, you can clearly see the line, the fish line. It's often quite invisible, but in this scene you could see it more readily. And John Fricke even mentions it in the commentary that you can really see it in the scene. But in this new high def version we're watching no more, they decided to take it out with CG. So they removed it entirely, and you cannot see it anymore in this scene.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It definitely helps, but I think I would rather prefer see it left in as a film preservation, whatever the word would be, in favor of that.
Yes. We're purists that way, that's for sure.
Yeah, purists, that's the word.
I just think that carpet is so interesting. It's border or whatever the correct term for that around a carpet.
Yeah.
It's flowers, and they're in this flowered area, so every little thing has this wonderful touch. We forgot to mention, or we're too busy talking, we just saw Frank Morgan in his fourth?
Right.
What? I've lost count now.
Yeah, fourth, and I believe he'll come back.
Yes.
To tell him go away again, but
let's see him again. The soldier with the green whiskers he's called in the book. But the telltale part is the flower that's stuck in his big long gun.
Oh yeah. It's so interesting how it feels like we're at this point of the film, we're starting to build to the grand, we're about to meet the wizard, but then there's so much more to still happen. It always kind of, for me in my mind, I'm like, okay, we're almost at the end. Oh wait, we're actually not. This is, just past the midway point.
Well, as far as Dorothy's concerned, her whole goal is to meet the wizard. So right now she thinks she's not going to, but once they do, you think, well, that's where the story's going, isn't it? It's part of the brilliance of the original book and then this film. It's a very unusual structure, and it's a very unusual attitude about about a powerful character for supposedly a children's book.
Yeah.
Don't be trusting these leaders that are maybe not all that they claim to be, especially the ones that are trying to trick you.
Right.
And are acting out of fear to protect their power.
Right.
So it's very interesting because these four, or should we say five, if we count Toto too, they never give up, and it's the friends of Dorothy, who her friends in this film, that they're devoted to her. So yes, they have their own goals, but like in that scene we just saw where Dorothy's crying, the Scarecrow and Tin Man are concerned about her. They are assuring her, we're going to get you in to see the wizard.
They all hold
Don't-
hands, they march in.
And there's so much scary stuff in this movie. This is
Ominous hallway. Oh, yeah,
this
this is
very
horrifying.
frightening. And of course, the wizard means to be frightening.
That's where his power sort of derives, is through fear and
Right.
manipulation, illusion.
So here's another role for Frank Morgan. This counts because
True.
we're still not entirely sure, but we believe that is Frank Morgan made up as the head. And it is definitely his voice, even if that's not actually him as the head. But it does kind of, if you really look at it, it does look like him. Definitely his voice.
Totally.
But again, he plays not only the comedy of it, but he does play the frighteningness of it as well.
Absolutely.
He's a master actor.
Do you know how this effect was achieved? Was it a projection, or was it like a overlay of film?
Again, I think to John Fricke's point, this is actually one of the simpler effects. It's the steam being shot up, and the head was just projected onto it.
It looks so good.
And then, of course, they put the smoke and the fire in front of it. It's often obliterated
Right.
but it's almost that's as simple as it is, and that's pretty simple in this film. But it's so effective.
Simple and effective. Yep.
And here's where
he's gone.
here's where Dorothy really shows her strength, that she does often. But here it's very concrete. She stands up to this terrifying authority figure and scolds him for being so uncompassionate as to frighten the lion who came to him for help. It's almost the same thing she does to the lion. She scolds him for picking on creatures that are not as strong as he is. It's the same thing. It's an interesting reflection.
We even see brandishing a gun and an extra mallet for a few quick seconds. I think it's so funny.
Right.
Where did he get that?
The lion has a spray gun of witch remover. It says that on the side of it.
Oh, wow. I've never noticed that.
See those red letters on the side of it?
I always thought it was just a mallet. That's so funny.
Oh, it does look like, I think a lot of people think that. It does look like a mallet, but it's a spray gun, like that you would put insecticide in.
And then a net, yeah.
Now, here's a very interesting touch. Again, the touches that they added that did not have to be done. From this point on, the Tin Man, when he crashes to the ground, he has a dent. He has a dent in the side of his upper body on the right. And that dent is there for the rest of the film. You can see it very clearly in certain shots.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that touch. Oh, one thing we were too busy talking about in The Wicked Witch of the West, right after the poppy scene. And I did a little video about this, so you might remember it if you didn't already know. But I know you have read the original book. The winged monkeys are controlled by the golden cap. So whoever has the golden cap controls the winged monkeys. So you can see that Nico, the name of the main monkey, hands the Wicked Witch the golden cap. It's never explained or referred to, but there it is, and she's so angry she tosses it away. But it plays an important role in the original book, so that was one little thing.
Another little touch that's always interesting is the quick little throwaway line she mentions. Oh, don't worry, I sent a little insect on ahead to, meet up with them. That was for the deleted song, actually, of the Jitterbug here in the Haunted Forest. I love that song, but I do think I agree with the cut. It seems a little out of place.
Yeah, totally agree. So her line for many, many years mystified people. Why is she talking about an insect? What is that all about?
What's the little insect? Yeah. The Jitterbug. And you can watch that on the bonus features of the home video.
Yes, unfortunately not the actual footage as with the Scarecrow's dance, but
it's sort of spliced. And
it was Harold Arlen took some home movies.
You can hear the song, yeah.
You can hear the song, yes. It was pre-recorded like all songs were. So they still have that.
And although it's kind of a jazzy dance number, I always found it a little spooky, even though I don't think it would have perfectly fit for the spooky scene as they were intending.
Right.
It's good they cut it, but
I agree. We had mentioned how many writers there were. There were also a good number of directors on this. The first was Richard Thorpe, and his stint on the film, which was a good few weeks, was ill-fated. He didn't seem to be getting it right, and he was replaced. And his footage, we only have stills. We don't have the footage itself, but it doesn't quite work. Part of the reason being is that the Dorothy character, they decided that she must be some sort of, not a real little girl, but a girl that would be like in an old fairy tale or something. She had blonde hair, was heavily made up. It's impossible to believe. And had a very frilly dress. George Cukor came on for a very brief time, and his one huge contribution, was huge indeed. He had them change Dorothy's hair and dress so that she was more like a Kansas farm girl. In fact, Baum says that Dorothy's wearing gingham, which would be more appropriate for that environment. And he also directed Judy Garland. He said, you're doing this like as if you're a fantasy figure. You're not the fantasy figure. You're the real little girl. And he said, you are a girl from the Midwest before you came here to Hollywood. So you know what that's like. Play her with great sincerity. Don't put on any of these fancy fake airs, and just play her for real. So that's the way Judy Garland played it from then on. And the main director, of course, is Victor Fleming, but we'll get back to that. He was a great craftsman and was often turned to save films because he was such a strong hand. And it was an unusual film for him to direct. He was mostly an action director and a man's director, Clark Gable being his best friend, and he was also well known for directing men. But he said he wanted to do this for his daughters. Right. So he was very, very happy. And of course, he did a beautiful job. Another thing that's so interesting is that the makeup is so well done.
Right.
Like, look at these three. You can still see who they are through the makeup. It was very carefully designed. It was also based on the original illustrations by W.W. Denslow. You can look at the illustrations in the original book, especially the Scarecrow and Tin Man. They look very much like they do in the book. But one reason they did that is that Paramount had made an Alice in Wonderland live-action film in the early 30s, and they had a lot of big stars in it. And they were all obliterated by these great big masks and costumes that were made that were very well done. But the problem is that they covered up, so they had these big stars and nobody could tell that they were the big stars.
Absolutely.
So MGM had said, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to make sure that everybody can recognize the people under the costumes, but still have the costumes be very effective.
Their facial integrity was preserved.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Absolutely perfect.
And one could say that some of the prosthetics look a little primitive to today's standards, but I think for 1930s, late 1930s, this looks amazing. If you look at other films of the time, and
yes,
certainly other adaptations of Wizard of Oz before this, the silent film, for example, this is leaps and bounds beyond any of that.
Well, I'd like to see some of the things that people compare it to, because I think this is all deliberate.
Absolutely.
I don't think the prosthetics are primitive. I think they were deliberately designed that way. But maybe it's because I'm not so aware of prosthetics in today's world. I don't know. But their acting is so wonderful throughout.
Absolutely genuine, full of humor, full of, all kinds of character emotion.
The makeup was changed from the first attempts by Richard Thorpe, the first filming. First of all, Buddy Epson was in that footage.
Right.
But the others were changed as well. And we haven't talked too much about Margaret Hamilton per se as the Wicked Witch. Her makeup, although, it's good and basically the same, it's basically Margaret Hamilton's face. So when the makeup was redone, her chin and her nose are very built up. So you can still see it's her, to our earlier point, but she's very designed and it's extremely effective.
Striking facial angles and the extreme pointedness to a witch's nose. Yes.
Yeah, she herself said, well, I've always had this nose. So I think that's one reason she was cast, frankly, but they do build it up in the Oz scenes. And her design is absolutely fantastic.
Totally. And Judy Garland's was altered a little as well from these beautiful blonde golden locks to the more simple dark-haired braids to really like ground her in reality and like a humble view, which of course she gets dolled up in the Emerald City. But yeah, you can really see the difference between the two artistic styles of the makeup from that transition time.
Yeah, and there are stills that exist of her in that earlier makeup. As I said, the footage is gone as far as we know, but you can really see the difference. And her hair is more like her natural hair.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm sure in the scenes with her pigtails, that is her real hair. But Margaret Hamilton, this is her greatest claim to fame. You can certainly see her in other movies, usually in very small parts where she's playing maids and housekeepers and that kind of role. Always very good, always very funny if it's a comedy. She just has a lot of comedic appeal, which, as scary as she is, she brings that to the Wicked Witch.
Totally.
So she's very, very frightening.
Margaret Hamilton had her share of scares on this film too. It gets talked about a lot. It's one of the most interesting topics, but she got severely burned in her opening scenes of the film, at least as far as the film goes chronologically, I should say. But she was supposed to descend down below the set in a flame of fire, and it was supposed to go off after she kind of disappeared through the smoke, but the fire was set off a little too prematurely, and she got severe burns that really caught fire because of the makeup, and she was, in a bad state for a while. And
you can see it in the film. Now, what I mean by that is she does make that exit with the ball of fire, and it's done exactly that way. It is not the shot where she was burned, because I believe they did it 3 times. And the third time was for security, as they say, or for safety, ironically, because that meant if something had gone wrong with the camera or something had gone wrong with the film, they filmed it multiple times to have different versions of it in case. I think it's the first take that they use in the film. But part of the speculation why something went wrong is it was after lunch, and they felt maybe people were just a little bit more sluggish after having a meal. And yes, it was mistimed. And unfortunately, her broom caught fire, and therefore she caught fire. And it was a horrible, horrible, horrible accident. And she was in the hospital for weeks. And there's lots of details, but there's a number of accidents that happened in the film. I guess not too surprising in a film of this scope with so much going on. But do you remember what one of the other accidents was?
I remember that several of the monkeys fell on accident as they were being lifted up on, however you'd say, the lifts, the strings, from a great distance too, in the haunted forest, down to the ground. Just all kinds of mishaps.
Yeah, and one of them happened to poor Toto earlier in this scene, where one of the guards stepped on him, or I guess we should say her. Even Toto was hurt.
No one came out unscathed, it seems.
Just about no one, right? But Margaret Hamilton always joked that when she came to Hollywood, she had heard that they were doing The Wizard of Oz, and she had loved it since she was 4 years old, as she always said. She'd read the book as a child and loved it, and was so excited that they were going to make the movie and hoped she could have some part in it. When her agent said, well, they're considering you for The Wizard of Oz, she was thrilled. And she said, what part? And he said, well, the witch. And then he said, what else?
What else? Yeah.
and you can hear her telling that story to an audience in certain places, audio commentaries and so forth, and she always got a big laugh. And she said, that's where she made the remark, Well, I've had this nose all my life, so I should have known.
Totally.
But it's her greatest claim to fame. But she did play many, many other roles on stage and all kinds of places. And I don't know if I should say ironically, but she became a spokesperson for Maxwell House Coffee and made these wonderful commercials. They're like little films. They're very soft sell. Where she was Cora, who the manager of a general store, and Maxwell House Coffee, the only kind I sell. So she played for many years this wonderful role of this real neighborly lady who was very grandmotherly, Cora. So we have those to treasure. And if you haven't seen them, everyone who's listening, please check them out on YouTube. There's a good number of them there. And she's just wonderful. So here's Frank Morgan in his final incarnation as the wizard himself, the humbug, the man behind the curtain. And to my knowledge, Frank Morgan wasn't often without his mustache, but he is here.
Now that you say that, it kind of looks like there's something missing.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks really good on him in the Professor Marvel scenes.
Well, Professor Marvel is how he usually looked.
Right.
Complete with mustache. I don't think he had many roles where he didn't have a mustache, his own real mustache. But to make him look even more different, they had him shave it off for these Emerald City scenes. And of course, again, he's absolutely brilliant. As I mentioned before, he plays the comedy and the sincerity and the kind of fraudulent con man that he is.
And so clever to, this just delves into the story a bit more, but they've had the power all along. It's just a wonderful illustration of all the gifts and.
Yeah, they received these symbols. And as he makes clear again and again, what you need is a diploma, a medal, an artifact. And that's so human nature that we feel the need of some physical representation. But it's quite comical, but quite obvious that they don't need these things.
It's like a subliminal, we get it without it being too, this is what it is, yeah.
Right. And they came to him for these gifts, and he's still able to come through. It's so touching. This part about the heart, of course. For years and years, as a kid, I thought that the Tin Man's heart, that is actually a clock, was on a string of popcorn. But it's actually a daisy chain.
Ah.
The wizard brings some wisdom. After all, he's a Kansas man, born and bred in the heart of the Western wilderness. But how many times can he let poor Dorothy down as is coming up?
Right. Literally down.
and they remember. They say, well, what about Dorothy? Of course, they never forget their friend, even though now they have what they want. And it's so moving when she says, what a great shot of Judy Garland with tears in her eyes. There's nothing in that black bag for me. But it's really the crystallization. Of course, it's the point of the whole movie, and it's coming up, that Dorothy doesn't need to be taken back in a balloon. She has the power herself. In the book, it's quite interesting because she misses the balloon the same way. And she's of course, so crushed and disappointed. But Baum tells us part of Dorothy is like glad she didn't go with the wizard in the balloon because she doesn't know what would have become of them. And she's got a point. He says he doesn't know how to work it.
If his track record continues, yeah.
Yes, it's quite hilarious. But this is another thing in a more common story. We already said the film feels like it's ending earlier. Now it really feels like it's ending.
Totally.
Everybody has what they need. He's taking her back to Kansas. What more could be needed or wanted?
Here's
brilliant structure.
Totally wonderful crowd shot here of the entire city seeing them off.
Yeah, so they wanted 300 little people for Munchkinland. They had over 300 extras for these scenes in the Emerald City. They really wanted crowds.
It really shows the scope.
Right. And see this is their goodbye supposedly. So they're all quite sad despite what's happening. They're sad to say goodbye to Dorothy. And look at her. She's very sad to say goodbye to them.
Yeah.
Because supposedly this is it. She's leaving.
She's got what she wanted. Be careful what you wish for. Going back way earlier in the film, because we're about to have the appearance of Glinda again. Spoiler alert. Glinda, it's such an interesting thing that people bring up. They act like Glinda is sort of being quite rude to Dorothy, or kind of giving her a diss, asking her whether she's a good witch or a bad witch. And I think something that really sticks out to me, Jim, that we were talking about the other day in preparation for this commentary, is she's not looking at outward appearance when she asks that. She's asking about the heart. Dorothy, are you a good witch or a bad witch? A lot of people take that to mean, oh, she thinks Dorothy's ugly then, because if she doesn't know the difference, then ouch. But, truly, does Dorothy's heart have good intentions or bad intentions? And I think that's totally what's happening there. And can't remember if she asks her again here, but certainly earlier.
Well, here she steps in because now she knows that Dorothy will listen to her. People always say it is a little bit of a disconnect that Glinda didn't tell her in the first place. If we look at it as like real people and a reality that's unfolding, wouldn't she have told her? But you have to listen to what she says. When the Scarecrow says, well, why didn't you tell her before? Glinda simply answers, she wouldn't have believed me. Well, there's your answer, everyone. Glinda knew that. And then we find out what Dorothy's learned. And once she says that and says to Glinda, is that all it is? Then she says, that's all it is. Now those magic shoes will take you home in 2 seconds. Because Dorothy's discovered the power in herself. Would she have been able to use the ruby slippers before? Apparently not. Because she didn't have enough power within herself. Okay, so this acting is incredible. Look at this. Look at that face. Now, this is incredible. And I've never heard anybody comment upon this. From this point on, it is one shot. There are no cuts. There are no close-ups. This is one continuous take. Right when they go to that shot of Dorothy. From here on out, it's one continuous take until they have the wider shot of the friends waving goodbye to Toto. All this emotion, all this acting, all this unfolding of this incredible, heart-wrenching goodbye was done in one take. And in other words, I don't know how many times they actually did takes of it, but the camera does not cut away. There's no editing.
It's impactful in
these 3 characters. And look at Bert Lahr. He's doing this incredible, moving performance.
Hear these comedians, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and always Ray Bolger's face is so sweet and so loving. Now watch, this is the first cut that happens during this whole time, right here when they wave goodbye to Toto.
Amazing.
That's an incredible amount of acting, and of course, Billy Burke as Glinda is standing there the whole time until the camera moves back toward her.
Right. Impactfully infused with emotion.
It's really there's so much in this film, so much music, so much comedy, so much beauty, so much thought-provoking fantasy. And it comes down to the acting. Every single person, every single actor brings such depth.
Right.
And that goes for Toto, too.
Toto, too.
But you can see the relief. Charlie Grapewin, who plays Uncle Henry, was a fantastic actor. He plays the relief that she's she's gained consciousness.
Yes.
And Aunt Em, look how she's looking at Dorothy with such love. And then Dorothy starts to try to get up, and Aunt Em's like holding her back. No, it's not a good idea for you to stand up or try to move. Just stay right there. She doesn't say that, of course. And Frank Morgan is so wonderful. It's such a masterstroke to have him come looking because he heard the little girl got caught in the storm.
Right. And though she's just said goodbye and it's a tearful goodbye,
right,
her realization of them being here, and she's like, wait, you were there, and you were there too.
You know, it's so if people listen to Margaret Hamilton in the audio commentary, she said, I cry every time I watch this film. And she said every time she watches it, she said, I'm not going to cry this time, and I always cry. She said, because it's this whole thing about home not being a place, but the people.
Right. There are some incredible quotes by Judy Garland and Roy Bolger in the commentary that I regret not writing down for this commentary. Maybe we can insert them or something, but truly beautiful.
Well, the Ray Bolger quote, which they chose to use, the most recent of the two audio commentaries, the John Fricke's a big part of the second one as well. They chose to end with his quote because he does talk about that whole idea of home, and home is something we can carry with us. And that's sort of what Dorothy's trying to say when she talks about what she learned. Everyone, we've paused the movie now. It's basically over, so you don't need to pause it. But we want to stop it here because we think we might have a few more things to say about it. We're going to see if that's true. But yes, I agree. Everybody has quite. Margaret Hamilton and Ray Bolger in particular, I think, had some wonderful things to say about this story and what it meant. And one thing I noticed is that if you look back over the years at some of the interviews that Ray Bolger said, sometimes people would ask him, are you disappointed that you don't receive royalties because it's so popular and makes so much money to this day, and yet you don't share in those profits? And you're such a big part of the reason it's making profits. Does that make you feel bad? And he said, I have something better than money. I have immortality. So that's a beautiful thought. This movie has made him immortal. But I think as time went on, he made a larger point, is that this movie itself is immortal. And the story is immortal, and the messages of the movie are immortal, and that's what made him immortal. even more so than his actual role. It's a bigger thing. So I thought that was an incredible insight on his part.
What a response, right? Shows how invested they were in the film and truly what they know it meant to the world. And you and I are direct results of that, Jim. We've loved this film. I mean, I don't know when you first saw it, but I've loved it my whole life and consider it one of my great classics that I go back to time and time again. There's certain movies that I go back to on a, rotation, and this one is absolutely one I watch at least once, if not more times a year. It's truly touching.
Well, I certainly lost track of how many times I've seen it, and I love it every time I watch it, just like now. It's so moving. Its magic is so effective. There's not many movies like that. Certainly many of the Disney films are, but there's not many that stand shoulder to shoulder with the Disney films like this one does. Part of the extraordinary story of the MGM Wizard of Oz is that it was shown on television once a year for so long. And it was in the pre-home video days, so it's not like you could see the movie. Now you could literally see the movie anytime you want, and we just did. We just proved it.
Yeah.
We can watch this movie absolutely anytime we want, and so can all of you, those of you who are listening, as you well know. But in those days, it was shown once a year, and that was it. And it had this incredible impact, and the audiences were massive. If you look back through the Nielsen ratings, and you can, they're a matter of record. It always was enormous in the ratings every single year, 40 and 50 million people watching it. So it was this great shared experience, and every time it was shown, that impact multiplied. And it's the great American story, that L. Frank Baum set out to write. He said a new kind of fairy tale, a new American fairy tale. Well, he certainly succeeded, as we can see both in his book and I think especially in this movie, where no one tires of this. It's incredible. Just as you said, Dean. Yeah, I mean, you're living proof of that you can watch it over and over.
Yep, and it seems new every time. There's always something I notice that's brand new. And, I mean, it's timeless. It really is. Doesn't get old.
Well, this has been great, and we hope to do another audio commentary soon. We hope all of you enjoyed today's, and we'll be back soon with more digging the details, more audio commentaries, more all kinds of things. Right, Dean?
That's right, Jim. And we're very excited to get together again and share some more fun trivia and insights with you.
So we'll see you all next time for another edition of Digging the Details.